podcast. I'm your host, Mike Klein. In this series, we're going to meet some of the world's comms disruptors. These are people working in and around communication who are really challenging and changing the game, challenging old assumptions, acting on new ideas, and demonstrating a willingness to share those ideas. Today's guest is no exception, Andras Vicsek. Andras is the Chief Innovation Officer of Maven7 and OrgMapper, one of the leading companies in the organizational network analysis ONA space. He has 20 years of experience in HR, 20 plus years of experience in HR and organizational development, and has been focused over the last decade in the areas of ONA and social capital. Andras is regarded as a leading exponent in ONA and has worked with over 200 projects in this specific sector globally. He is the second generation ONA expert who is passionate about bringing social capitals and networks onto the agenda of HR and management. He's a global expert on the application of ONA and change management, HRM practices, and improving organizational performance. Welcome to the show, Andras.
Thank you so much, Mike, for the invitation, for the introduction. Great to be here with you.
It's great to be here with you. As it happens, I was in Latvia last week and I was speaking with a fellow by the name of Valdis Krebs, who was
Hmm.
familiar with both you and your father, and he sends you his best, by the way.
Yeah, same to him.
Excellent, excellent. Have a number of questions for you. I guess the first question we have is, where have you found the most success in getting organizations to embrace social and organizational network analysis?
Yeah, great question. Um, lately there's so many changes happening and so many disruptive changes happening with organizations through all the economic, environmental changes, with even with wars and geopolitical changes. So there's so many disruptions, and with AI, that organizations need to be much more efficient and faster to be able to react to these changes. Um, so there's a real need to bring in new methodologies that can help organizations that have been doing the same thing for decades. For instance, the automotive industry. We have a lot of clients in this space where they're used to just building cars for 100 years, and they have very clear processes, and now they're being disrupted by electric cars, Chinese manufacturing, cheaper cars. So they need to be much more adaptive to what's going on in the world. And all of this requires, of course, new ways of communicating the changes, um, channels that are uh, fast, and channels that people trust, and make things much smoother when it comes to changes. And so in this case, I would say the typical use case for ONA is involves um, some kind of large scale change, typically coming from a change in leadership, C-level leadership position. Like there's a new CEO, and he or she wants to roll out a new strategy, which requires um, new behaviors, new culture, new ways of working. Or there's like a merger or an acquisition happening, and you want to bridge the cultures of the two organizations, and you don't have time to waste. Uh, and of course, along so under these the high level use cases, you always have organizations which are trying to become more efficient at sales, so changing their sales processes, the way they collaborate. Um, you always have organizations who are trying to bringing new technologies like AI, but any type of digital transformation that they're doing that involves a lot of behavior change. And there's of course huge issues with low adoption rates of using new tools. How do you get people to use new tools? How do you speed that up? And in many cases, ONA involves once you have data on connectivity, how people collaborate, how they share knowledge, there's an interest in understanding the diversity of the connections and how inclusive the networks are in terms of gender or other attributes.
So you've touched on a lot of different dimensions of both the applicability and the demand for ONA, particularly large scale change, um, big ticket change at the top of organizations, big ticket M&A, but also optimization, like efficiency, like accelerating use of technology. But one thing that you talked about specifically was the importance of trust in all of these factors, particularly trusted communication, but I think trust in general. To what extent does ONA uniquely um, provide insights around trust?
Yeah, absolutely. I think ONA is the tool to map trust in an organization. I mean, you have tools that can um, sort of assess formal communication more, or you can control the types of uh, channels you're using for formal communication. But there's much less information that you have on how people actually communicate and who are the people who trust each other, who share um, their concerns, their fears about changes, or who actually influence the thinking around the changes within the organization. So it's much harder to get that type of data, and this is exactly what ONA does. It helps you to understand the network of trust and the network of influence in the organization.
So you mentioned the automotive industry as a hotbed of interest in ONA, which when you said that kind of surprised me. Where does ONA fit in uniquely within the culture or the processes of an automotive manufacturer? Because I have this picture of you've got factory workers, office workers, legit, you've got, this whole symphony of physical relationships. How does ONA overlay into that rather fixed kind of organizational structure?
Yeah, I have a friend called Michael Arena, and he used to work for General Motors, and he was responsible for sort of, or not responsible. He was the one who sort of created a totally new methodology which helped General Motors sort of do like a positive self-disruption and trying to bring in hackathons, trying to connect different pockets of the organization, trying to connect parts of the organization which are more entrepreneurial with parts which are more like the operating system, doing the routine stuff in the organization. Uh, and it was the same issue because they realized that there's so many changes around them happening that have an impact on their business that they need to change. On the other hand, as you said, the problem is that they're so process driven. What they're used to is having standards, having very clear processes, who does what, and what's the output that comes out at the end, and then they're gonna do the same thing for years and years, and no need to change. Well, maybe there's new technologies coming in, but that's not that often. Um, on the other hand, because of all these changes, um, they have to sort of bring together people from different parts of the organization. Like, for instance, how do you um, create, bring in new digital solutions to the automotive industry, like car sharing, for instance. That was one of the things that General Motors did was realize how about if they sort of become a car sharing service provider, but then that requires something completely different than they were doing. They need to sort of become software developers. They need to think about business models around apps. Uh, so how do you create that in a very rigid culture, which is more focused on processes? Yes, it's so going back to your question that it's difficult, but on the other hand, it's so much needed that typically the request comes from either HR who see the business need coming from the senior CEO or strategic leaders, and then realizes that there's a lot of human side to this change and the organization change management aspect of it, and then it lands on their table. How can you sort of help us to make the whole organization more adaptive, more agile, more reactive to the changes? And technically, of course, there's a lot of challenges in how do you actually implement ONA because, for instance, we're working with a automotive company with more than 10,000 people now, and 8,000 of them of the the blue collar workers basically they don't have email addresses, so you cannot do the survey based approach, the active ONA with them, or you cannot do the passive because they're not using digital tools to communicate with each other. Um, so in this case, yeah, we have to figure out, how to put out computers where they can have access to the platforms to provide to share their connections in the platform.
Yeah, that's actually something that I did with a snowball survey at a construction materials company
Hmm.
that we literally had to choose a survey platform and then have people with tablets move the tablets around the employees. We got some fairly interesting data out of it. But it was, certainly a much more mechanical process than I was anticipating when I bid the project. So that was interesting.
Yeah, just a short story. So when I got into this whole ONA business, that was back in 2004. Um, at that time, it was really hard for even in a manufacturing firm to get if they didn't have tablets or this type of things at that time, and Wi-Fi in the manufacturing site within the plant. So I was actually moving around with a paper-based survey and asking people to provide their answers. But yeah, now with tablets, it's easy to find these solutions.
So, we talked specifically about making organizations more agile, more responsive, particularly when they're traditionally rather rigid. Um, to what other extent do you see ONA as playing key roles in improving organizational performance, perhaps in, a less rigidly industrial environment, perhaps in more of a knowledge environment?
Yeah. Yeah, so we also work in more like knowledge driven industries. For instance, we have a client who's a global management consultancy, and they have more than like around 100,000 people around the world, but we work with one of their locations in the UK. And one of their problems is they as with management consultancies, they provide very different services to their clients. So you have people focused on tax related consulting, you have people focused on deals, you have people focused on um, audit or in general advisory. And one of the problems that they're facing, and I think this is very typical, is the lack of cross selling. So you might have someone who is is a partner within tax, part of the organization, offering tax-related consulting services, and working for Coca-Cola or Sainsbury's or really large clients, and then hearing about their issues and then all the strategic changes that are happening, for instance, reorganization or any type of transformation that they're going through, and they don't immediately think about involving people from advisory or other parts of the organization. So that if they would, of course, that would result in a growing pipeline, in a larger cross sales driven revenue and all sorts of positive things. So because of that, they realized they should somehow um, sort of motivate people to do more cross selling. Of course, you can do that easily with bonuses, rewards, and commissions and all of that. The problem is if they don't know what the other part of the firm is providing as services and who they should reach out to and what they can offer, then it's not going to happen, even if they are financially motivated.
So what you're talking about is really kind of like silo smashing. You're taking the individual sales units and you're breaking down the walls so that they've got visibility of each other.
Yes, exactly. So um, cross-selling is going to happen in this type of knowledge-driven industries if there is already collaboration happening and people know about each other, they know who to turn to, they have their experts within the different teams, and it's an active collaboration that is ongoing. Then it's going to be easy for them to think about who they're going to pull in for a new opportunity from deals or other parts of the organization. And of course, in this industry, everything is about knowledge. So the broader knowledge you can bring to clients, the happier they will be. And there's no one person in the organization who will have possess all the knowledge and expertise. So you need a lot of connectivity, and you need to understand where are the silos, and you need to help to build out new connections.
One thing you'd mentioned earlier, you were talking about broader knowledge, but you were also talking about particularly diversity and inclusion and the extent to which ONA could help facilitate and accelerate that. Could you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. So, um, so it's a quite complex topic, of course, and where ONA can sort of bring in new insights is, I think, more the inclusion part of the story. Because if you think about, diversity, it's quite easy to measure diversity because it's a certain ratio. For instance, when you're talking about, gender, like let's look at board members and different seniority levels. What is the ratio of men and women within the different hierarchical layers? So if you want to understand how diverse those teams are, you just look at the number of people from those groups. But how do you actually measure inclusion? So that's the question. And why is inclusion important? I think that's the even more interesting question. There's this quote from Verna Myers, who's the VP of Talent at Netflix, and she had this quote. I really love this quote. It's diversity is being invited to the party, while inclusion is being asked to dance. So you might be invited to the party and sit in the corner, like in the boardroom. You're part of the board, you're part of a leadership team, but you're not included the same way as others. And then all the impact you wanted from diversity, all the value is not going to happen actually. Uh, so you really want inclusion. That's the real thing. That's what you're looking for. But how do you actually understand whether certain teams are more inclusive or not, or certain hierarchical layers are inclusive or not? And of course, networks are one of the best ways to measure that. You can see um, how actively men are connected to women or women are connected to men, how they're collaborating, asking knowledge from each other, um, or because one of the tendencies we see, and it's almost from all of these projects we did through the survey-based approach, we have questions such as who do you turn to for advice for certain questions, and then I don't know if you can guess what happens when we look at the gender differences for this question. Basically, what happens is that for women, it's 50-50. 50% of their connections go to women, 50% of their connections they turn to men. For men, 70% of the connections they turn to other men, and only 30% turn to women. So there's already something that is it's really like an unconscious bias. So if you would ask men whether, hey, are you biased? Do you turn more to men? They would probably say no, 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 it's not an issue. It's equal opportunities for me, and probably that's what they feel. And when we look at the behavioral side, and this is why also ONA is a better approach than the attitude surveys that they do around inclusion, because you actually look at the behaviors, how they connect and include uh, others. So you can actually see that this is already happening in the lower layers at the employee levels. So you already have more men who are managers, and then when they need to make a decision on who's going to get promoted, then because of this unconscious bias and because of this tendency that men turn more to men, men will be more visible when they make these decisions. So the likelihood of selecting men will be higher. So and the higher we go in the hierarchy, in the ladder, seniority ladder, this type of influence gets stronger and stronger, of course.
And so what you're really doing is you're bringing transparency, you're holding a mirror to the organization, and then you're giving them a tangible issue that they need to sort out rather than just simply, saying that this is something important in principle. I mean, the other thing is a lot of traditional research and organization asks people how they feel about things, but how they feel doesn't necessarily have much impact on what they actually do
Exactly.
or
It's
how
it.
they say
Yeah.
they feel particularly.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's I'm a my background is in psychology, so yeah, with attitudes, there's three elements to it. There's the emotional part, like what you feel. There's the cognitive part, what you think about it, and then there's the actual behavior. And that's the for the organization, of course, that's the important part because you can think a lot of things and you can feel a lot of things, but if you're not including others, then the whole culture won't be inclusive, even if people feel it is.
No, understand, and that's a really valuable insight. Um, Want to shift gears a bit, given that a lot of the people in this audience are from the communication professions and particularly internal communication in focus. How do you see organizational network analysis and internal communication working best together?
Yes. Luckily, there was several projects where we did where we there was a good case of different functions, including internal communications experts working together, and I think that's the best when there's some kind of organizational change, for instance. So if there's a specific project, whether it's a cultural change, whether it's a digital transformation. Um, of course, it involves a lot of communication, so you need internal communication people to be part of that. And that's you actually working on improving the change communication. So you need to involve those people. In some cases, I also sort of, to be honest, experienced that there might be some kind of competition within the functions, like you have the um, change management or organizational development, practitioners within the organization who want to, sort of be responsible for the project. but it's really also it of course it involves a lot of internal communication, so they need to involve internal communications who then feel that, hey, this is an internal communication project, so why are we not the drivers of the project? So there are some cases when it also comes down to whether these functions can support each other and work together.
But in terms of what ONA can provide for
Hmm.
internal communication, to what extent have you seen ONA data
Hmm.
um, improve or accelerate or
Hmm.
optimize internal communication in the organizations with which you've
Hmm.
worked?
Yes. Um, so of course, I think I mentioned that in the beginning. There's within the internal communication, you will have the formal communication channels and you have the informal communication channels, and it's much easier to measure how successful the formal communication is, asking about the different channels, the newsletters or the social media platforms or the newsletters, whatever. It's harder to measure informal channels, and then if you start to use the informal channels, meaning you identify key influential people in the network who can spread information, how do you start working with them, and then what is the impact of working with them going to be on communication itself, like the the trust to the information that they receive through these channels, or um, the speed of the communication that reaches people. Typically we don't measure, to be honest, these type of outcome variables. It's more around engagement. And the best, I think, the best projects that we did with the highest increase in engagement score was always when um, the whole ONA was sort of, I think, actually an internal communication project, because it was about, look, one of the problems we have in large organizations is the top of the organization is disconnected from the bottom of the organization. So you want to get the messages through. So what you do is either use the formal channels. You can reach everyone through emails and social media and videos. But through the informal channels, how can you actually reach large mass of the organization and then create impact and trust and engagement through those channels? Um, so what we typically do is identify those influencers, and then the organization creates a group, like a change communication community from the identified influencers, and then regularly turns to them, like has monthly or bi-weekly meetings with this community to discuss um, the changes that are happening, also to have feedback from them on their perception of the communication that reaches them. And I think that's like a really gold mine for also for internal communication people, is to understand um, how the messages through the formal communication channels arrives to people at the lower layers. What are their fears, concerns? People are not going to, of course, provide detailed and high quality answers in surveys around fears and concerns and what's really going on. You can sort of tap into that through the informal networks and yeah.
It's interesting that you say that because there's a lot of talk, particularly in internal communication circles, about listening. And there's kind of a background conversation that you should be listening to everybody. And what you're really saying is that if you have a well identified group of influencers, you're going to have the benefit not only of their knowledge, but the extent to which they're relaying what they're hearing from everybody else. And so it gives you a richer stream of listening than, what you'd get from surveys or what you would get from conventional feedback tools.
Yes, and I still strongly believe that face to face communication between people who trust each other will always be much deeper and will be more honest and will provide much more insight than any type of just using the digital tool itself to, for instance, dig out data from survey data or from social media or what other tools that people are using. I think if you can sort of listen to those people who listen to most of the people in the organization through their trusted channels and build trust with them, you're gonna hear much more um, honest information. You're gonna get much more detailed insights on how and what people are feeling and why, uh, and what their needs are. Um, so of course I'm not against collecting data about so using surveys to understand how people are feeling, but I think in-person discussions, the two-way communication that you can react to that immediately and go one step further and ask a question and then they can ask a question and then you can challenge that and they can challenge that, it's always going to be much more valuable.
So, as you said, to listen to the people who are already listening to the people
Yes.
and being able to probe them, engage with them, go deeper into the questions than you can get in a survey. I mean, I think that's a really powerful case for ONA as a listening tool as opposed to just simply a communication acceleration tool.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed, because as you know, I've been promoting ONA and social analysis for a number of years, and I often encounter skeptical organizations. What do you think the best way to introduce organization, what are the best ways to introduce ONA to skeptical organizations?
Well, let's look at first why they're typically skeptical. What have you heard? What interesting to what are the typical resistance?
The typical objections that I get are, there's cost, which is, something that everybody objects to cost all the
Yeah,
time.
that's
Second is privacy,
mhm.
that we may be violating certain people's privacy. You know, is there a way to do it anonymously, and is there any value in doing it anonymously? And if we can't violate the privacy, why should we bother doing this at all? Or something that I get from middle managers, which is that, the last thing that they seem to want is to have their own weaknesses within their networks and their own weaknesses of leadership exposed. That if you create a picture of an organization where you've got a lot of, you know, people who are hubs and spokes, and very few of those people are middle managers. It leaves the middle management core exposed.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah,
Those are
those are
and
those
and
are the
that's something that
yeah
people are genuinely scared of.
yeah. So those are the typical objections actually that come up. The first one, the privacy, I think you can manage that through. I mean, to be able to collect data and analyze data around networks of how people are collaborating and communicating, it cannot be anonymous because you need to know who is communicating with who to be able to draw up a network. The question is, um, what do you share about this information with the client?